Welcome to Clarkston Memories. Our show looks at the rich history of Clarkston Independence Township. The guests on the show have been a part of the community for a long time and have memories to share that hopefully the new residents will help the new residents understand the heritage of the community. And I'm joined today by Roberta Weichert Allen Steele. Most people know her as Mrs. Allen. Mrs. Allen lived in Springfield Township and Clarkston for over 80 years. And welcome, Mrs. Allen.
Thank you, Joanne.
Mrs. Allen, you moved to Springfield when you were about 8 years old.
8 years old.
So tell us just a little bit about when you moved out in the country and what life was like. You moved along Dixie Highway.
Yes, yes. We moved here from Pontiac, Michigan when I was 8 years old. I started in school here in the second grade. Mrs. Beardsley was my teacher, my first teacher. Ruth Valit was the principal. And at that time, the elementary school was on the left-hand side and the high school was on the right.
Now that was what's now is the Renaissance High School.
Yes, yes.
So if we can have a picture, we do have a picture of the Renaissance High School today, but
yes.
But at the time, this was good 80 years ago.
Yes, yes.
Talk a little bit about your father was a farmer, is that correct?
No,
oh.
no. My father, at one time, we were born in the thumb. We three oldest ones. I was one of five. And we three oldest ones was born on my grandfather's farm in Pigeon, Michigan. And Ondale, really, but most people don't know where Ondale is, so it's Pigeon that we say. And we moved down here when my father started working at Pontiac Motors for income. And then during the Depression, when times got bad, we moved back up to the thumb where my father rented a farm and farmed there for probably 4 or 5 years, and then we came back down to Pontiac, where he worked at Pontiac Motors for many years. And then we moved to Springfield when I was 8 years old, as I said. I was one of the oldest of the 4 girls and 1 brother, and we lived where actually the Waterbury, the elderly Mrs. Waterbury owned our home, which she also owned her own home just 2 doors from us, really, which is now Lowry's Landscaping.
And so it was across the road from, was it on the same side of the road as Lowry's Landscaping?
Yes.
But
yes.
And the house is no longer there.
Yes, our house is gone.
But you talked about some childhood memories of sledding down.
Oh my goodness, yes. My father would carry buckets and buckets of water across just this side of where the Whoopie Bowl was standing later years. And he would ice the hills so that we could go right out onto Bridge Lake, which we would have toboggans, and we would have a house full of company on Sundays because they loved to come out and toboggan.
And we have a picture of Bridge Lake from the Whoopie Bowl.
Yes.
It's most people don't see Bridge Lake.
No.
It's because of its location. Talk about, there was a bridge. The bridge was always out on Bridge
Yes,
Lake Road.
yes.
And talk about the bridge, because your parents,
we were told that it was a floating bridge, and it was built of logs and lumber. And we were told when we would swim off the bridge that we weren't to go under, ever go under the bridge, because we could get caught on the logs. So we were very fearful of that. But as the years went on, the bridge, I believe, was destroyed.
yes, and it's always the bridge is out, and so now there are
Yes.
several legs to Bridge Lake
Yes,
Road.
yes. It's all changed now.
You remember, for our viewers, there was no I-75.
No.
So Dixie
no.
Highway was the main road to northern Michigan.
Yes.
And you had some interesting, in the late 30s and the early 40s. Tell us about some of the businesses that were along there, and
Oh, my
especially
goodness.
the canteens.
Yes. We had the canteens on both sides of the Dixie Highway. On the left was the big canteen, what we
explain
called.
it. Yeah, and explain what a canteen, because
Yes.
I didn't know.
It was a more high-class restaurant, and it was owned by the Clark family. And the Clarks lived upstairs and also run the gas station next to the canteen. And the one on the opposite side, on the right-hand side going north, just this side of Davisburg Road, was a long, narrow canteen where the buses stopped and would leave the people off to eat or use the restrooms or whatever. But the Greyhound buses at that time was very prominent in our area.
And that was we were about halfway between Bay City and
Yes.
Detroit. So this
Yes.
would be a time when you would
Yes.
need to use the
Yes.
facilities and have a
Yes.
bite to eat. And we've talked that the building that was the canteen, I always thought it was a garage or something, but
No.
it was just torn down this summer.
Yes.
We don't have a picture of it. It was right on the corner of Davisburg Road and Dixie Highway.
Yes, yes.
And so it was a Greyhound buses. You said you could just catch a
We could
Greyhound
go
down.
out by the road and just hold up our arm that we wanted to go to Pontiac or Detroit, which we did as we got older. And the bus would stop and pick us up and take us on in.
And then you told me the owner of the Greyhound Bus, Greyhound Bus, at least around Michigan,
Yes.
lived close by.
Yes, he lived where Dr. O'Neill lives now, because my husband Bill would go and do yard work and wash windows and for the owner there, and he would tell many stories about the Greyhound.
So we have a picture too of a gas station, and most people have a sense that it's the gas station.
Yes.
Was that Leo's?
That was Leo's gas station, and we dearly loved Leo. He was the owner there, but he would just let us children come in, and we could buy penny candy or nickel candy, and we loved Leo.
And then there was another gas station. It's hard to see, but I think it's some kind of a auto maintenance right now. It's on the other side of the
yes,
street.
that
with,
was Dobson's gas station. And
you talked-
Mr. Dobson run the station there and had two daughters. Doris Dobson was the best friend I had there on the Dixie, and one of the best friends. And I talked to her not too long ago, and we figured it was 60 years since we'd seen each other.
You talked about Stagecoach Hardware. Was
The Stagecoach store was there, what we called the Stagecoach, which was more like a hardware store. The grocery store, Smith's, was across, where I used to go and help occasionally. But then we had a streetcar made into the restaurant right next to the Smith store. And that was very interesting. It was there for quite some time, as I remember.
I understand that you work for the Ellis
Yes.
family. Now, the Ellis Barn is...
Yes, Mrs. Ellis would call my sister and I and ask if we would help come and clean, which we did quite often. And yes, I can remember Mrs. Ellis was a lovely lady, as well as Mr. Ellis, a very tall, straight, real business people.
And you said he always dressed...
Yes, he was usually in riding outfits, of course, because they had many, many horses.
We have a picture of the Ellis Barn, and it's the Ellis Barn in 1900.
Yes.
But it is, I believe you told me that is how you remember that.
Yes, very much so.
barn.
That's
It
how
was
I remember the barns.
Quite fantastic, built in 1884. So,
Yes.
and it stood where the Frosty Boy is today, is that?
Yes, we would see the horses many times out in the fields and riding. Sometimes they'd be riding them.
You know, and I missed this when we were talking about schools, but you told me that your mom had have to drive you to school because
My
there were no
mother-
buses, right?
Yes, we had no school buses. My mom, Mrs. Waterbury, and Mrs. Ross made 3 trips a day in and out of Clarkston, taking the children, which was very few. We didn't have that many houses along Dixie Highway at that time. Bocart's, which is now Bordine's, was Mr. and Mrs. Bocart, and they had a small greenhouse out in back. We had a farm down farther, oh yes, and then we had what was the Rose Farm later years. But at my day, it was the Drake Farm because they had children that we picked up for school.
So the parents drove. Now, you graduated in 1945.
I graduated in 1945.
And
And I forgot to say that at the time, even before I graduated, I worked at Infrared Ray, which was next to the Union now.
Oh.
And that was where we wired. In fact, they're still on the Dixie Highway down toward in Waterford.
in Waterford, right.
Uh-huh.
So you're at your 70th class reunion this year?
We haven't had a class reunion because we graduated in 45, and there was, I think, 45 in our class.
Oh, okay.
So the many of them are gone. And but oh my goodness, Clarkston was and still is a lovely, lovely place to live.
Well, shortly after you graduated, I understand you married Bill Allen.
Yes.
And that started another chapter in your life.
Yes.
His family had a farm on Allen Road.
Allen Road.
And tell us a little bit about his family.
His family was great farmers, and down below there was 80 acres on where my husband Bill was born and raised.
And that's north of Radley Lake
Yes,
Road.
north of Radley Lake. But down over the hill toward south was his grandparents' farm, which was 230 acres, which went out to M15 now, and there's a big church built on the corner now, Radley and M15.
Well, we have a picture of the silo from the original Allen
Yes.
farm that his Bill Allen's grandparents, and that's all that stands of that larger farm. But we also have some pictures of Mr. Allen's where he grew up,
Yes.
and that was the farm. There's another picture of what the house looks like today, which was very different. This was a picture taken in 1968, I believe, by the Clarkston News, and it had been remodeled. But there's also a picture of the barn, and large barn, and that barn still stands today.
Yes.
I was on the barn tour maybe 10 years ago. But it's a huge barn. Talk a little bit about when Mr. Allen's parents moved to this farm.
I don't remember so much about when they moved there as I did after Bill and I.
I think the article said 1914 is when they moved there.
I would think so, yes. And Mother Allen, which was always called from me, Mother Allen was from Leonard. And of course, Guy Allen was from here and was born down on the old place, what we called the old
South
place.
of Radley Lake.
Yes, yes. And it was a rough life. They had a very, no electricity. Shortly after Bill and I was married, they put electricity in the barn, and then later years in the house. But Mother Allen had to pump water, run and done washing in a motor-driven machine that was really quite an operation for her.
But that was she was sort of a pioneer of the time
Yes.
with the automatic.
Yes.
They had a
Yes.
pump, and then
Yes.
it came in the house,
Yes.
and it was interesting. to
Mother
read.
Ellen would tell about going to church and heating the bricks on the old cook stove to keep her feet warm in the buggy and the horses, of course, and go to church. But Mother Ellen was a wonderful, wonderful lady. Never believed in doing a thing on Sunday, not even dishes. If you work on Sunday, you're going to lose it on Monday. That's her theory.
Well, I don't know if most people know, but the fastest way to get from Clarkston to Ortonville in that day was to go down?
Yes, actually, Allen Road was the main route to Ortonville before M15 was put in.
Because of the hills, and you were going in a buggy or a wagon. But you had a great story about people stopping at the farm.
Oh my goodness, yes. They would laugh and laugh about people would stop to use the outside john, and the geese would chase the women in their long dresses. And
well, then you talk. That's really funny. We would never think of that, but
yes.
But also talk about. You also talked about the Indians in the area.
There was a settlement of Indians. We were told they were in the woods one winter, and in the what we call now what is the Allen Woods Estates, and they would exchange potatoes, corn, anything. For the presence of jewelry. Mm-hmm. And at one time in the old trunks we had some of the jewelry, but I've passed it on to my children, and I don't know, I wished I would have kept some of it, and yes.
Well, it's maintained if it's in the family, so.
Yes.
So as we talk about that, the Allen, I think we have a picture of Allen Road sign, and because your husband didn't want to be a farmer, was that correct?
No, Bill never cared about farming.
Okay.
He went, after we moved bought the house on Buffalo Street, he went to work for Standard Oil, and he drove truck and delivered oil to Ortonville, all the surrounding areas.
And I know he worked at Pontiac Motors.
Yes. Then later years he went to Pontiac Motors, and that's where he retired from.
Well, we have a kind of a picture of the house on Buffalo. It's 41 Buffalo.
Yes.
And kind of talk about it was interesting how you found out about the house being for sale, and then the age of that house.
Yes,
and
we were ready to buy a house on Holcomb Street and all ready to sign, but we went into the bank and Bob Jones said, go look at the Ori Adams house over on Buffalo Street. He said, I think you would be very interested in that house, because I always had a desire to buy an old house.
we have a picture of that house.
Yes, I just seen it on the...
Oh, okay. And it was built, I heard, in 1834?
I believe so.
One time you told me it was a schoolhouse?
Yes. I was told by Ada's Grace that our living room, what we called the living room, housed 3 students at one time, and actually was one of the first home schools that was in Clarkston at the time.
Well, you had told me that Mother Allen sold eggs and she sold butter, and that must have been something that people did at the time.
Yes, many people in Clarkston in town would come for her butter and eggs and whatever she had.
And then you had a little note in your house about it was in the wall, a note that you found when you were remodeling.
Her name was Wilberg, and she had a terrible time. She owed someone in Pontiac for butter, which was 3 cents a pound, and she had no idea how to get it there, because to go to the depot, that was quite a trip in those days. So, and she was an elderly person, but that was a note that we found when we were remodeling the house.
Tell us a little bit about your remodel job, because the house still stands today, and I mean, it looks like an older house. No one would really think it was over 100.
Yes. We loved our home once we got it the way we wanted it, and the Hansons was next door, which was Judge Morley's house, which was very interesting. Mr. Morley had passed, but Mrs. Morley was still living just in the kitchen and dining room of the house. when we bought our house. And I don't think Mrs. Morley lived maybe 3 years after we had moved in. But then the Hansons came, who we dearly loved. They were the best of neighbors, yes. And Marilyn taught at the high school, and our son Rod was born before that. He'd started to school, I believe in 1953, and he would ride to school with Marilyn, and it was so funny because she'd call Bill and I and say, "You better be to the school tonight because Rod's getting an award." Really. So yes, she was a wonderful, wonderful neighbor. They both were, she and Paul, and had a daughter, Polly, only one.
Well, there's a picture. We have a picture of your house, of you in the house, and
Yes.
you decorated a lot of that house with.
Some of the things from the farm.
Yes, I think the spoons. You want to explain this? The Lydia spoons.
Yes, you mean the wooden paddle or the spoons that it was Mother Allen's great-grandmother's spoons.
Okay.
And they were very flexible. They were made in, I think it was England. That is the spoon rack showing there.
And then the clock. You had the clock.
Yes, and the clock. The clock was given to Mother Ellen on her 16th birthday.
So that would have been early in either late 1890s or early
yes.
1900s.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Now, I know in that house on Buffalo, you told me that you brought some of the bricks from the silo.
Yes. We made a garden in the back and put the old dinner bell, which we'd use later because we had a swimming pool out in the backyard. And we'd go out and ring the bell when the kids were in the pool. And then we built a flower garden and built it up with some of the bricks from
the farm.
Old silo.
Now, Mr. Allen was a volunteer fireman. So tell us a little bit about those
my
days.
Goodness. The fire department was a big, big part of our life at that time. Don Beach was the fire chief who lived on the corner of Church and Buffalo, right across the street from us. And his wife, Henrietta, was the dispatcher. So we knew everything that was going on in town. But my husband, Bill, was a volunteer. At that time, it was all volunteer guys, and we were one big, happy family. In fact, when my husband, Bill, got very ill, he never met a stranger. The firemen took care of him.
And the fire department was right there. I mean, you were only about a half a block from the fire department because it was right behind Morgan's gas station at the time.
Yes.
So.
Yes, we had many, many good times, and we knew all the firemen at that time.
Well, tell us. So somebody would call the dispatcher, and you would. The phones were very different. There was no 911 in those days. You would call. You had a phone number, and you would call.
Right.
And then what would happen?
They would call, and the dispatcher, Henrietta Beach, and say where the fire was, and the men would respond immediately. But one of my favorite stories about the fire department is Rudy's. The women had an auxiliary, and I was president of the auxiliary. And whenever there was a fire, Rudy would prepare sandwiches, coffee, everything for the firemen. And when the Old Mill Tavern burnt in Waterford, they responded, and Rudy called me in the middle of the night and said, "Bert, get some of your gals together and come down to the store. I got sandwiches and coffee." And
that was like late 1970s or early 1980s.
I think probably in the 70s, if I...
Well,
dates are hard for me to remember.
No, I don't remember either, but I do remember the smoke. We lived on Waterford Hill at the time, so I do remember that. You know.
But Rudy was a big, big
supporter.
Oh my goodness, in Clarkston. Whenever there was a death in town, he also would call the auxiliary and say, "I'll have the food prepared for the family dinner." And he would have everything ready. Rudy was just a wonderful, wonderful man, and we had observed Rudy on his 70th, I think it was his 70th birthday, and we made caps and aprons for the little ones. And there was a float, the stores were all closed. And if you see down in the park, there's a memorial there for
Rudy.
that was made by the firemen
For
in
Rudolph
honor of
Schwartz.
Rudy. Yes.
Yes, Rudy and Elsa were really
Oh
part
my-
of the community.
Yes, yes.
Okay, now you also had a career at Oakland Technical High School.
Yes, I
That's as it's
spent
called today.
Yes, I spent 14 years at the Tech Center. Just before that, I worked for two doctors, Dr. Berklow and Dr. Ploggy, who were both surgeons, and I absolutely loved working with those men. And I worked in the back with the doctors, and Dr. Berklow was a head surgeon at Pontiac General at that time. And my first patient was a little guy that took his finger off at the knuckle, and he came in with it in a paper cup. And oh my goodness, what am I? I had just started and called Dr. Berklow, and Dr. Berklow said, Bert, you know what to do. Get it washed, and I'll be there to sew it as fast as I can. And he did, and I held his little finger till the doctor sewed it back on, but he had his imprint so hard in my hand, I couldn't let go or never shed a tear, the poor little guy. That was one of my favorite stories. But yes, I worked for the doctors, and then at that time, Dr. Green, who was superintendent of the schools, called and said, Bert, would you be interested in going to the Voc School? It was the Voc School to us.
Yes, right.
And I said, yes, I think I would. He said, we need someone to do the ordering and the buying and work with the students. And I spent 14 years there, which I dearly loved.
Well, tell us, you told me the story about the ketchup. So
Oh my goodness, yes.
you need to tell the story about the ketchup because we have some icy roads these
Yes,
days, and so
yes.
everybody will understand.
Dick Morgan's gas station, he serviced any of our vehicles. And we had to go out. We had 3 country schools when I started with the schools. Bailey Lake, Foster, and Clarkston Station. And we were going to Foster, and we had big containers to serve their lunches, hot lunches. And by the way, what I'd love to say is that when the lunch program started in the Clarkston schools, Mrs. Wells, who lived over in Sashaball, would make soup and hot food and take it and put it on the cook stove. That's how the lunch program got started. Well, I ended up there I retired after 23 years with the Voc School and the high school. And anyhow, we were out on Foster, and it was a bad day, lots of snow. And I was driving the old panel truck, and I said to my helper, you know, we can't make that hill, we got to go around Walters. And we did. And I got out to the curb and missed the curb, went down into the ditch. And we had ketchup in the back and on big sheet trays. And it come sliding out the door, went all over that white snow. I said to my helper, we got to go way back to that house up on the hill. And we did, called Dick Morgan. And he came out. I'll be right out, Bert, as soon as I can. And he did. Well, of course, when he got out there and seen the ketchup on the snow, he thought we'd been killed. We were fine, but every time I'd go into Morgan's gas station, he'd say, Bert, you been out on Foster lately?
So basically, at that time, they were cooking in one place and then delivering the food to the schools.
We were cooking and preparing in the Renaissance building at that time.
Okay.
And then later years, the elementary was built across. That was our first.
A school with a lunch,
with
a kitchen,
yes,
right? With
yes,
a kitchen,
yes.
right? But then you went out to the vocational school, and then you helped out there also.
Yes,
is that correct?
yes. I hired into the vocational. I was there 14 years, and we had a morning session. At that time, Clarkston Schools run the vocational school. Holly, Waterford, Ortonville. I did say Ortonville and Clarkston. And we had 42 on the staff, and it was one big happy family.
So you were there pretty much from the beginning of that, of the vocational?
No, not right at the beginning, but it wasn't very old when I went. And we prepared lunches every day to the public, except Monday. That was class time.
Okay.
And
So thank you very much. Can you, you've shared so many memories with us, but do you have maybe your fondest memory of early Clarkston?
It was the friendship. You know, in my day, everybody helped everybody. Like I said, when my husband Bill was so ill, he never had a stranger transport him to the hospital, wherever. The firemen done it. It was such a different, Rudy helping Dick Morgan, Jerry Odell. I mean, it was a...
Who was a pharmacist?
It was a completely different world.
Very, I mean, a smaller community at the time.
Yes.
And people all pitched in.
Yes, everybody knew everybody in Clarkston at that time. And yes, today it blows my mind to see all the changes. It really does.
Yes, things happen. Well, we want to thank you very much for your time and your memories.
Thank you, Joanne.
And
You've been wonderful.
thank you for our viewers for watching Clarkston Memories. If you'd like to share any of your Clarkston memories, please contact me at, my number is there and my email is there. For your information about Clarkston history, go to the site of the Clarkston Historical Society site, and this YouTube video will be, as well as being on public access, it will also be on the Clarkston Historical .org site. Thank you again.